Okay, hello everyone. We have now started the broadcast. Happy to welcome you today at our webinar conducted collectively with the team of AWS partner ThinkIt. And we will speak about building data spaces with cloud computing and enabling secure data sharing for different purposes, but for instance, for social impact and beyond. My name is Kristina Szlachtowska. I'm program manager at Data, AI, and Industry team based out of Berlin, as you might have heard a few minutes ago. The ThinkIt team will introduce themselves in a bit. So I have already introduced myself, but it would be also great to know a little bit more about our audience today. And speaking about cloud customers, we see the pattern that they can generally be defined as belonging to one of the groups, the so-called builders or buyers. And the builders are those who have capabilities and a wish and skills to build their infrastructure themselves. They make their hands dirty and using cloud services build their technological stack. Those who would identify themselves as buyers would like to have everything ready and just deliver to them as a customized solution, educate their teams on how to use the solution, but generally they wouldn't have neither the capabilities nor wish to build themselves. And I would like to hear from you whether you would identify yourself as a builder or as a buyer. So Jana will turn on the poll function just in a second. And I would be grateful if you would provide your answer so that we can know you a little bit better. Maybe a few more seconds till everyone had the possibility to respond. I hope you have been able to find the poll function. Thrilling. I can see the results, so it's I'm very thrilled to share them with you. I think, Jana, we can close the poll and show the results. Okay, so we have 94% of the audience who are builders and 6% of the audience who are buyers. And I have good news for you. For both groups here, we would have something interesting and valuable to share today. And you will definitely come out of the webinar with a clear idea what to do with your data space project further on. So I also often get the question, what is the role of Amazon Web Services as a cloud services provider in data spaces projects? First of all, we identify ourselves as a trusted infrastructure provider, and trusted, I say trusted because we have more like multiple million users all over the world. And we provide cloud services for more than 16 years already with the highest security standards from all cloud service providers. And we are happy to provide you our services to use to build your data spaces. For those of you who have identified yourselves as builders, it is important to know how to use the services in a way that you can build the most scalable, secure, and cost-effective infrastructure. And for those of you, we provide prescriptive guidance for many use cases in many industries and for different concepts such as data space, for example. For those of you who have identified yourselves as buyers, we have a broad AWS partner network of skilled companies who have expertise and are certified to use cloud services from AWS and build customized solutions for our customers on them. AWS Partner Network has more than 130,000 partners. 70% of them are based out of US. Many of them are based in European Union. One of them, ThinkIt, is like a good example how AWS Partner Network can help you to build your data spaces projects. And of course, data space as a concept on itself doesn't make a lot of sense if participants cannot use that data. So the next step after the data space has been built is to use the data, for example, with advanced analytics and AI ML services, which I'm happy to provide to you. In terms of the connector services, as AWS, we have chosen the strategy that we deliberately work deriving from customer needs. As you know from, for example, International Dataspaces Association's reports, there are over 20 dataspace connected technologies out there, and our way of working with it is that we help our customers to integrate their technology of choice for connecting inside of dataspace and among dataspaces with AWS services. One of the examples is Eclipse Dataspace Components Connector. AWS has recently become the Catena-X member, and we had multiple customers requesting integration of Eclipse Dataspace Components Connector with AWS services. That is how, for example, the simple storage service S3 have been integrated with EDC, and there are also more integrations. Another example would be Fiber Dataspace Connector. We have had also customers requesting that integration, and it has been done already too. And I have also brought one small example, which has been implemented by the ThinkIt team, the Smart Freight Center. Smart Freight Center is a network of logistic providers, for instance, shippers, for different retail areas. And some of participants of the Smart Freight Center are, for example, Amazon Logistics, Nestlé, Dow, and also a few other big shippers, and also the Climate Pledge Association. And for instance, Amazon Transport has had a challenge there to aggregate the data from its shippers to ensure the calculations of CO2 emissions along the supply chain. And at the beginning of the project, one single data sharing iteration has taken up to 30 hours. So AWS partner ThinkIt built a POC using the data space concept and using the EDC to enable the federated data sharing across multiple supply chain entities. And after this POC has been implemented, one data sharing iteration became 2 hours long, so 15 times quicker than before. And this POC also enabled the data sharing of standardized data. Based on this use case, the ThinkIt team and also a few colleagues from AWS, myself including, we have published an ebook about exchanging data through data spaces for environmental impact and beyond, where we have outlined which steps and which challenges and which solutions for that challenges you might meet on your way to building a data space. Also, based on this use case, ThinkIt have published a strategy, which is a step-by-step guidance, how to build a data space, how to think about data space and strategize this project, and also a technological pattern. I will now hand over to the ThinkIt team, and while they will be presenting, I will put the links to the mentioned strategy and the pattern into the chat. Rami, I'm handing over to you. Please confirm that you can present already. Okay, I see your presentation, so that should work.
Excellent. So, thank you, Christina, for the introduction. And I really want to thank you and AWS as a whole for the close collaboration we've enjoyed over the past few months and years. And today we're really here to share something I believe is relevant to both buyers and builders, what you said, personal insights and the technical pattern for minimal viable data spaces and beyond. And it'll be less a detailed walkthrough, as we've really well documented everything in what Christina is going to share, but rather some highlights, and then a deeper dive into the common challenges encountered in the wider data space ecosystem and how we're going about solving them. In a second, my colleague Rami will speak about the technical advancements as well as a step-by-step practical guide for those interested in deploying. Federico will then dive deeper into just data with a more holistic approach. And then my colleague Malte will also be here in the background for further Q&A support at the end. And the idea here is, let's collectively make advancements, learn from each other. We want this to be an interactive session and a lively discussion. But first, just a few words on who we are. Why are we here talking today? And it's been said or quoted before that we're an engineering collective that's saving the world with data. And now, especially in the conversation today, we're democratizing access to data spaces and enabling informed decision-making for everyone. And so we click forward and say, well, who is thinking in this? You may have heard of us, you may not have heard of us. We tend to fly under the radar sometimes, but since day one, we've been a values-driven organization, so much so that we were actually to be a nonprofit organization when we were first created, but have shifted to profit. And what we do is partner with organizations who have the vision and passion to solve global problems and push the boundaries of what's possible, be it creating a medicine carbon footprint calculator, mapping rainforest biodiversity, or even building apps that de-escalate conflict in war zones, that we're an innovation accelerator for organizations solving people and planet-centric problems. And with AWS, we work really closely on the data ecosystem, public sector, and sustainability teams because we specialize in data stewardship, especially projects that fall at the intersection of data and sustainability and impact. So we're going to go over some of those learnings from the data innovation work we've done with teams like BMW Group, BASF, Amazon, Nestle, Berkshire, Dow, name it. And then what went into that technical work that we're presenting today is coming from that innovation. So then a quick step on, okay, so data spaces or data collaboratives or sovereign data sharing, all really just a novel way to share specific data securely. And if you're on this call, you probably already know it's a framework with a clear set of rules. Data stays at its source, is only shared upon explicit request with permission by the owner based on an automated criteria. Now, what's really important for the context of today and most data space conversations is that there's different tools for different needs. Not every tool has value to every project. And this is really key, using the right tool for the right job at the right time. So the value here in data spaces as a tool is when the data needs to be shared across and between organizations, but there's sovereignty and or access concerns. So now that we've gotten that, why are we here talking about data spaces? Well, we do have extensive real world experience. In our journey after working on BMW Group's Cloud Data Hub automations, we were brought in to enable their integrations and operationalization in Catena-X and mobility data space. And then from there, we've really been at the forefront of the EDC connector, deploying configurations of it to set up BMW supply chain, several different OEMs, as well as building entire data spaces from the ground up, as Christina spoke about, for those world-leading shipping and supplier companies. And we've evolved over time to be data innovation enablers for many teams, an AWS partner of choice for data spaces, qualified advisory consulting company for Catena-X, as well as a member of the Catena-X architecture committee, being chosen to train the Cofinity-X team on the EDC and contribute to their data space OS and beyond. So we really do have years of extensive experience across different realms here. And even since the early days of the EDC, we've consistently been the most active committer, driving the EDC roadmap and upstream work and consulting with different companies on how to configure and implement connectors in their environment. But even beyond that, we are versed in other connector technologies such as Fireware, Garnet Framework, and other things that we use as data space components in essence. So to say that we're data experts beyond data spaces to provide a holistic approach to data exchange. And then what we do ties into what we're talking about today in a second. So though we work on many innovations in data spaces, kind of simply boil it down to three things. We build and scale data spaces. So we can build and manage bespoke data spaces based on use case needs end to end, be these custom POCs or MVPs that be spun up in a matter of weeks, or something much, much, much greater as we extend towards managed services. And this is where the MVDS, or minimal viable data space, really is born out of. And we also make it a lot easier for participants to be in data spaces. So those innovations that we've honed across working with partners that we named, BMW, Nestle, Amazon, as well as SMEs in the value chain, we've been building a suite of open and some closed source repositories, including connectors, connector clients, governance UIs that allow engineers and non-engineers to communicate, integrate, abstract away, create beautiful UIs within familiar portals, just make things simple and easy for people to participate in data spaces. And again, that's what we're talking about today, is opening up those things and making those things available to more. And furthermore, our R&D has been internally solving on an enterprise level for speed and reliability of deployments, workload balancing, self-healing, cost performance. Rami will touch on those in a second. But lastly, our world has spanned beyond data spaces, so providing long-term advisory technically and non-technically, for instance, around your data strategy, enabling AI from your data spaces, which Fede will talk about in a second as well. And just thinking about, our partners do span beyond data spaces alone. So if we want to see about who we work with, even beyond the large capacity. But today, talking about why sustainability. Why is this the concept we talk about? Well, it's core to who we are. And as Christina already mentioned in the SFC project, the use case here was meant for data exchange reporting around activity in the logistics and mission data. And it involved diverse stakeholders, including logistics service providers, shippers, carriers, tool providers, all collaborating under a shared governance framework of data sovereignty and security, which is very much how a lot of the data spaces are built. And the value here is obvious. These Scope 3 emissions account for more than 70% of a business's carbon footprint, and that data is unreliable. This is why they have such a problem. And so as more governments are adding legislature around compliance and reporting, these leading logistics organizations are already involved in this data space because we see this coming, sort of the stick or the carrot. And that's why we're excited about this topic. We believe in the open source technology and providing you with free to use building blocks and how to create your own data spaces or help you walk through that in a much more rigorous way. So today, coming to exactly that, the prescriptive guidance, the pattern. And this comes after the strategy book that is the business side of minimal viable data spaces. Together with AWS, we put these two together, and today is more about that step-by-step guide to deploying the different modules to build a minimal viable data space. So it allows you to test, explore data spaces, enable testing here and there as a collective so that we can get closer to adopting. We do have a recorded video that walks you through the documentation we provided on GitHub. It goes into deep detail and it'll walk you through with ease. So if you have certain validation or customization questions, or if you want to take steps beyond the minimal viable data space into more production ready or use case specific, we're definitely here to help verify and enable you as well. So very, very simply, this is something you probably already know around better decisions and faster, but it's worth stating again. We need to move from closed data to sovereign data, from competitive advantage to collaborative advantage. This is why we've created this openly for everyone. And with that idea, I want to pass this over to Rami to talk a little bit more about the technical aspects of what we're doing.
Thank you, Kai. I hope you can see me. I'm sharing my screen again. I hope now it's also better. We want to take some time today to dive deeper and explain a bit more the work we have been doing around the pattern specifically. The idea that we started looking into in the beginning is, okay, like how can we support now customers of AWS to leverage the infrastructure and start working on exchanging data as soon as possible. And the aim behind like the design of the pattern and the decisions around the architecture was actually to get closer to a blueprint. The outcome of this work has been this document now that is publicly available on the AWS Prescriptive Guidance Library. It helps, and it is meant to be a step-by-step actually guide that is hands-on, technical, with the goal to basically take an organization, developer teams through the different steps of setting up what we call the minimum viable data space at this point. We followed the traditional architecture or the standard structure of AWS patterns at this point, We cover the summary and then precise clearly what are the requirements and the tools needed for this. We explain the target architecture and then break down the workload into epics. Yes, I will try to invite you and also interest you to read the actual details and the steps. Similar to what my colleague Kai already shared, we provide also this demo video. I will use the time to discuss more the specifications in a way. What we want or what we targeted in this pattern specifically is that we identified 2 participants, or we build it for a use case where there are 2 participants or 2 companies specifically. One is a data provider in the logistics industry, and the other one is an auditor in a way. And more on the dataspace specifics, we are following the dataspace protocol, basically leveraging the EDC-based connector Catena-X. We picked the 0.4 version and also went for a centralized design for the identity service using the dApps. It is, however, possible, and we mentioned this in the next steps and recommendations in the pattern, to upgrade and use the latest. We prioritize for the pattern also an ease of integration, because in our experiences so far, like starting a database with a centralized identity operationally usually helps, with the goal that in the long run you shift into a decentralized setup. From an epics perspective, we tried throughout the pattern to cover different roles involved into actually building up or getting to a first minimum viable data space. In the beginning, we help you set up the development environment and then show how to deploy the identity service. We also provide in our open source repository some code, so CloudFormation templates, to help you get started easy in a way. Once you deploy this shared infrastructure, you then start deploying each participant's connector, a provider one and a consumer one. Then we configure those connectors and show you how to interact with their management APIs. Once we get to that step, we then start looking into the data exchange specifically, and we guide you through the different steps to exchange a file, so carbon footprint emissions, from the provider to the consumer through the connector. And we leverage S3 bucket as an example of a data plane that is already supported by EDC, as Christina mentioned, but we also show you how to go about it from a programmatic way. Maybe a bit to the target architecture. As I shared before, we aimed to have an architecture that is like on a blueprint level from a best practices perspective. That's why we leverage AWS best practices here when it comes to the separation of the networks, allowing only one public endpoint to interact with the private network of the clusters. And then for a high availability purposes, we already split it into 2 availability zones. We leveraged heavily Kubernetes at this point. Within the pattern, you can also see ways to leverage Amazon RDS as well. To show you a sneak peek, basically, also, or maybe a way to test that the setup is running would be through the API, for instance. This is one way where you can use the Python scripts that we provide in the repo to, like register a data asset, so a file, a JSON file, and then consume it from the other connector, basically. But we show you the steps here where the asset has been created, and then we attached a policy around it, and then offered as a contract. Afterwards, you can see the negotiation steps that are happening. Once the transfer process is like launched, you can then see its ID. Another way, if you're more on the UI side, would be to actually open your HTTP client, Postman in this example. We also provide some Postman collections out there. And you can interact here. For example, it's an endpoint to check the contract negotiation. So we basically set the ID of the contract, and then its state shows that it is verified. Maybe to wrap up around the pattern, sharing with you a few recommendations that could help you to take the pattern and then move it to the next step. So things like using more than one AWS account. So each participant should have an AWS account, and then even more Kubernetes cluster out there. It is also possible to include what exists in the pattern into a CI/CD pipeline, maybe with code build and code pipelines. For friendly domain names, maybe Route 53. But then most importantly, and this is what Federico will be talking about hopefully later on, is to consume and provide data. I want to take a few additional minutes to share with you our learnings and insights when it comes to taking connectors out there and then really operating them in productive data spaces so far. And maybe I'll briefly touch on the challenges aspect that we observed and how we are trying within ThinkIt, and also offering to partners problems like solutions to those identified challenges. We try to summarize when it comes to the operations in our observations so far and the experiences. It was most of the time challenging to manage the dependencies of the connector, especially maintaining a good relation with the upstream EDC, trying to stay in sync, and then handling breaking changes and the different version management aspect of this. It was also in our observations very challenging to manage the configuration in basically a reliable way within a distributed system where you can have different participants running multiple or different versions of a code base actually. So it's more error prone when it comes to that. We also observed limitations when it comes to performance and cost, maybe in a way, coming from the inherent EDC design, where so far at least it is not straightforward to use one connector for multiple participants, but you have to have this one-to-one mapping in a way also linked to the identity. A lot of solutions have been like considered into this, and also with our strong collaboration with the EDC as an open source committer, we're trying to solve for those problems. Also, security and sovereignty is still something that technically also requires attention. For that, we are offering to partners basically different services and solutions around those problems, and then we look at it more from how can we enable the fast and the reliable management of those connectors in more of a systematic, programmatic way. We also optimize costs and performance by enabling the more secure and isolated usage of the same cloud resources in a way. And I'll show you briefly like how that could look like. And then from a security and sovereignty perspective, we also enable different ways to orchestrate or even remotely basically orchestrate connectors, where we try to support setups where partners have on-premise infrastructure, but then we manage that infrastructure remotely for them. Briefly to show you the idea behind the cloud resource or the shared cloud resource in a normal setup where you have dedicated cloud resources for each of your connectors. For instance, we take a setup where we have the connector deployment with the control and data plane, and then you have the UI, and you use Amazon RDS with a Postgres database at this point. In a dedicated setup, you will have to have the same setup replicated for each participant. We look into, like we provide basically solutions around how can we maintain still a secure and sovereign exchange while leveraging the Amazon RDS cloud resources in more of a shared way. Okay, I hope this has been helpful. I think the message that I want to end up with is that the data journey does not actually end by enabling data exchange, but goes even further than that in our experience. One can even say it starts by enabling data exchange. I'll let my colleague Federico say a bit more around this.
Thank you very much, Rami, for presenting the quick start to dataspaces and some of the challenges and solutions that we encountered and implemented. Now, it's time to talk about data. Building on our experience on contributing to dataspaces, we find it essential to reiterate the fundamental role of data in ensuring their success. Nowadays, we can think of data like the new oil or digital gold mine. This is not just buzzword terminology. Data actually underpins everything from daily basic operation to high-level strategic decision-making. Without accurate and timely data, making well-informed decision is very, very hard, if not impossible. Advanced technologies like AI and analytics thrive on high-quality input. And our finding shows that data spaces are exactly the same. So for any of those systems to function effectively, the underlying data must be clean, well organized, and continuously updated. It's often said that garbage in and garbage out. Poor quality leads to poor insights and outcome. And that's totally true. A robust data strategy not only improves data quality and management, but also enhances confidence in data sharing and other applications such as AI. This confidence enables organizations to leverage this type of asset more efficiently, supporting multiple internal and external use cases. Whether it's improving customer experience, streamlining operation, or driving innovation, a strong data strategy is crucial. And the benefits range from, again, enhanced decision-making capabilities and improved operational efficiency to strong innovation and strategic foresight. That sure sounds like a lot, right? Given the amount of data that you enterprise businesses have to manage already. But that's not all bad news. That's actually good news here, because a well-defined strategy can help you with the current and your future efforts. So first, we should talk about data preparation. In order for it to be shared, data must be prepared and vetted, that we know. A unified strategy emphasizes key steps such as anonymization, cleaning, ensuring data completeness, and structuring it efficiently. These steps are the ones that powers your sharing capability as well as others, again, such AI. Next, effective data management facilitates collaboration. When data is well prepared and managed, you are more comfortable in using it and also share it. This boosts cooperation amongst internal stakeholders and external partners as well. Everyone can rely on qualitative shared data, which is dependable and finally useful. At last, a solid data strategy unlocks tremendous value extraction. As we mentioned before, better data yields better decision-making. But that's just the beginning. By investing in a comprehensive data management strategy initiative, you can maximize data potential in a more holistic way. And once again, these require to go outside of your venture boundaries and collaborate with others, de facto creating an ecosystem for the data economy. Data is one of the most valuable assets in today's organizational landscape. It drives new business models and facilitates innovation. Companies leverage data to create customer-centric products and services, leading to distinct competitive advantage and deeper market insights. Extensive regulatory frameworks are in place to ensure a more thoughtful and compliant data exchange. But we also need to acknowledge the elephant in the room here. Up until now, data spaces have been driven mainly due to regulatory needs rather than practical organizational benefits. To say once, there's still no agreed upon business model for data and data spaces, which present a significant challenge in strategic decision making. But that's not all to worry, because this gap should be addressed collaboratively through experimentation and the use of qualitative data. By efficiently managing data, we can all drive together towards a sustainable new frontier. A strong data strategy supports both compliance and growth. It ensures that business can navigate regulation while unlocking novel opportunities. So, in conclusion, we are very excited about the possibility that well-managed and safely exchanged data can offer, and the opportunity to work together to shape the future of the data economy. For today, we'll stop here as we covered, I think, a substantial amount of technical information and the necessity and benefits of having better data at hand. Now, we want to give back to you the microphone, let's say, for further question or require additional clarification. Nevertheless, don't be afraid and don't hesitate to get back to us. Feel free to follow us, follow up via email at the email that you will see soon. Thank you again for the attention.
Thank
Christina?
you, Federico. Yeah, thank you, Federico. Thank you, Kai and Rami, for the great presentation. I would like to now open the floor for the questions and also to ask our attendees about their perspective. And as we have 94% identify themselves as builders, I would like to ask everybody, not only Rami and Kai and Federico, which technological challenges have you experienced on your way to data spaces? I know I have seen many of you either at the Data Spaces Symposium or at Big Data Value Forum or in another circles related to data spaces. So my assumption would be that the audience here is very well familiar with the data spaces projects and often even engaged in data spaces projects for many months or even years already. So I would like to encourage our attendees to put a few words about which technological challenges have you experienced in your data spaces projects. And while we are waiting for the answers in the chat, I would also like to address this question to Rami, Kai, and Federico. So what is your experience?
Yeah, I can go ahead actually. I think mostly so far in the scope of what we like collaborated and contributed to, maybe I can name two common challenges that we usually observed while setting up data spaces. A disclaimer or spoiler alert, those usually are not technical challenges. So in essence, kickstarting the data space requires a lot of collaboration, and that's where, in our observation, most of the efforts should go there. I'll stop at this point. Maybe leave some room also for the attendance.
I want to mention that Federico has spoken about the elephant in the room, and I mean this is a pretty huge elephant. The challenges with business models are not of technological character. And I also remind myself about the experience with the Smart Trace Center. If I remember properly, you have developed the POC in like less than 4 months, and it was working. And now you have a data space connector as a service per click, which can be deployed in around 3 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Like you, less than 3 minutes. Oh my God. 2 minutes. Now we all know the brand of your laptop, Kai. And well, this is impressive, right? And this confirms once again that these are not technological challenges which we often face. And can you please share also your experience? I assume, or I don't know actually, what is your experience? Have you been working with organizations which have that technological teams, and you've been working with tech teams together, enabling them to maintain the data space further on? Or were the organizations outsourcing the data space deployment and also maintenance fully to ThinkIt?
Yeah, so like the expertise we hold is in a way centered around the connector itself, so the EDC, and we have been contributing since the beginning in a way to this open source project that is allowing us to support actually our partners in different ways and customize. So far, we tried or we experienced actually like the developer aspect or the operations aspect of the data space components themselves. So within Catena-X, for instance, we looked into the connector, the enablement services, the core and business application even as well. And then we also like are providing now this connector as a service where you can in quick steps get onboarded and start actually worrying about the purpose behind this, which is sharing the data and connecting and integrating the systems out there. I think it's also visible throughout the pattern and strategy documents that we worked on with AWS. We have been supporting partners as well strategically and on a technical leadership perspective, thinking through designing data spaces, thinking around the roadmap, moving from a POC to an MVP to a full scale build over time. That as well have been something that we work with partners on. Maybe Kai, please feel free to add.
Yeah, I'll add in something here that's interesting. If we think about the minimal viable data space, as a starting block for a lot of people, and then we look into the future and we see Catena-X is often the lighthouse project we see a lot of advancement on. But even with the work we've been doing in Catena-X as the most advanced data space, when it comes to like large organizations or enterprises, there's so many different stakeholders and stakeholder needs that you go past the technology itself and you go to, okay, so now we have connectors, we have multiple connectors, we have a fleet of connectors. Now, who needs what permission? Who needs what to see what? Who's going to do what with the data? And it goes back into what Rami was saying. There are technical aspects where we need to enable this to be developed to the needs of the users, but then it is also about those needs of the users and them understanding the non-technical users of the technical product, if you will. And that's something, again, we go into where a lot of what we see as data spaces isn't the technical aspect. It is a lot of the work around the non-technical work so that when we deliver something technical, it becomes valuable and useful to the organization. And I think that's something we've seen across every single organization we've worked with in data spaces, is that it's a really important aspect.
Thank you so much. Sorry, Cedric.
I may also add one little bit, building on top of this. Yes, we develop a lot of technology, but also what is very interesting and valuable to look into, as Kai was mentioning, what are the business needs? Often people or the user won't even care in a way that the connector is sitting on the bottom. So that becomes even more interesting in what we discover and what we are working on with multiple organizations is what is the need and how do we deliver the best value for the business owner at the end, and that doesn't need to know all the details.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I see that we have plenty of questions and comments in the question section. So I will now try to read them out loud, one by one. And these are a lot. So maybe you can take them one by one and respond in a short and succinct manner. And to those of the attendees who will like to have more details, please just reach out to Rami and Federico and Kai. I will share the contact details with you after the webinar. So starting with the last one, which open source components and services are being used to build their data spaces besides Stratos X EDC? For example, components like credential, issue, wallet, etc.
Yeah, like a straightforward or concise, rather a precise answer would be like to break down the types of services and components we talk about in the data space, where we would look into the identity space, the trust space, the basically other specific extensions of the data space in the design of the EDC. So it's basically EDC-based connectors that are inherently relying on open source, and also try to remove the dependencies as well as much as possible. In the observations and experiences so far, we were able to leverage open source components for setting up infrastructure, and that is a strong part or strong property, so open source, that actually reinforces trust as well. I hope this helps. Maybe you can take the next one.
Yeah, the next one is the SFC example involves very homogeneous data and a very predictable data flow. Can you describe other use cases with more heterogeneous usage patterns as well as large volume data? I think connectors and discovery of data across many connectors does not scale well with large amounts of data and predictable access patterns, etc. So heterogeneous data sets and big volumes of data.
Yeah, I think very interesting question again, and also can take a full deep dive. What we learned so far is the answer to this question is reflected into the maturity of the data space participants when it comes to the technical infrastructure, but also the data business or data strategy. Like that's where the answer, and it ranges usually in terms, like it is reflected in the semantics of the data that is being shared. Like first data spaces, we usually simply build like an API that acts as an application in front of the connector to reflect the data that needs to be shared. Like this is how we usually start. And then over time, the more mature the data space gets, the ecosystem and participants need to align on now additional building blocks into the data space. And then we start talking about vocabulary how, start talking about logging or clearing houses, a centralized broker to act as a catalog. So yeah, like the paths are enormous, and the technical decision is usually based on the business needs and also how can we make it actually work. I hope this also helps. Happy, of course, to dive deeper, so please reach out separately and we can have chats around.
Thank you, Rami. The next one, as a buyer, can I own a data space instance? If yes, how can I manage it? For example, how can I invite participants and manage them? I can take that one in organizational sense. So basically, it's a lot of organizational effort and communication and coordination. And it's also about the rules underlying the data sharing. In case you have any legislation which regulates the data sharing, then your administrative overhead could be probably less because you have predefined set of rules of data sharing, and all the participants need to adhere to that. And you just need to include them into data space from the technological perspective and communicate all the organizational aspects. If it's about cross-organizational data sharing among organizations which want to benefit from data and collaborate on data, it's all about digital contracts underlying the data sharing, and it gets more complex. From SFC and Catena-X, we have seen that usually requires a separate legal entity which coordinates and administrates all the rules and all the participation, organizational and administrative aspect. From the technological perspective, I think the pattern which Rami has showed today confirms that you can own and maintain your own instance, and also I assume that sharing invites and inviting participants to to participate in the data space should not be difficult. Rami, would you have any comment on that?
May I like briefly adding, because you answered pretty well in my opinion, Christina, thank you so much. Like this question is related to the governance aspect of a data space, and like that is also a design topic that in the beginning we try to discuss and plan for. Based on the governance, one can own a data space and then decide how to invite participants. So yeah, like governance topic is very important.
Okay, thank you, Rami. The next one, you have mentioned the data space is not mature. How do you see the main business advantage going for a data space compared to a more traditional data hub? Would anybody like to take it, or should I?
I can start because it is a bit of one of the earlier ones we talked about, where it's the value around data spaces is really around that, sharing across or between organizations when there's sovereignty and or access concerns, and that's when the collaborative aspect matters so much, and that's when it's like the right tool for the job. And this is something we actually do see pretty often across different projects or different data collaborations is, oh, interesting, maybe a data space isn't the best tool to solve this use case. We do see that often enough. So data spaces are a really useful tool, but it's not the only tool, right? If you're building a house, you're not just going to use a hammer to build everything. And that's where it comes in, is really on those aspects of sharing between or across organizations, and the sovereignty is a really important aspect.
Yeah, thank you, Guy. I would completely agree with you. Another one, does AWS offer own connectors? Short answer is yes and no. We don't have connector as a service, but for example, ThinkIt has, and it is built on AWS. That is why we work so closely with ThinkIt team. And we are happy to provide you with any assistance whenever you need to integrate your connector technology of choice. We thought that there are so many connectors, and some of them, like EDC or Fiber, are so advanced already that it makes more sense for us to integrate them with existing connector services with our technologies, because these connectors are there already. Our customers are using AWS services already, and we are happy to bring those two together. So we support our customers with solutions architect support to integrate existing connectors with our services. The next one, how do you see the connection with Gaia-x framework? From organizational perspective, AWS is member of Gaia-x Association. In technological perspective, we have had customers who were seeking for support there. At the same time, the needs were very different. So usually we provide solutions architect support for the customers to figure out the framework usage on themselves, or refer to ThinkIt, because ThinkIt has also experience with it. How the participants, this one is probably for Federico, for Rami, how the participants of the data spaces are verified, thus they can develop trust each other to exchange data.
I can start perhaps by saying, well, this boils down to consortium agreement or participant agreement. What we were talking before, the hard part is actually more on the organizational side, like agreeing what and how to share data. From a technological perspective, there are multiple solutions. Perhaps I let Rami touch base on those.
Thank you so much, Federico. Yeah, like in this scope of data spaces, the technical solution allows the following framework, where we would say, okay, the participants, they need to agree on how the rules of the exchange should happen. They then reflect that into the connector, and then the connector, we trust the connector to make sure that those rules are applied in the exchange. So this is the like the policy management or the data usage management that is out there. Now, we should always keep in mind that there is this technical enforcement, but the technical enforcement can go only so far. And then what Christina was referring to with Federico is the other side of it, as in the business should agree, like rules, maybe contracts can be set up. How easy that is really differs from a data space and ecosystem to another. I hope this helps.
Thank you so much, Rami. There are also two questions. I will address them quickly and then wrap up the webinar. One is about interoperability with other data spaces like Catena-X or Iona-X, and generally about the technological agnosticity of the MVD, minimum viable data space. And I want to repeat once again that technologically, ThinkIt collective, for example, can make everything possible. It's more on the from the organizational perspective that you need to have an agreement between different organizations. The data spaces concept in itself is developed to be able to connect different technological stacks. So while this MVD and the pattern show participants using AWS technology, it is possible to connect different participants using different technology stack. And that was also the case with SFC and Catena-X projects where ThinkIt were participating. So in each project, there were different technological stack used by different participants, and ThinkIt's role was to build a working solution for federated data sharing among them. And there was also one question about AWS European Sovereign Cloud. I have put the resources into the chat, so please feel free to use them to take a look and have more info. Coming back to our presentation, I want to, you should be able to see my PowerPoint slide deck now. Is it in a nice fancy mode? Can you see it?
Yes, but not in the nice mode yet.
Not in a nice mode yet. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Does it work now?
Now it does, yes.
Okay, great. So this is a survey. We would be very grateful for your input. Sorry. Please give us feedback, and if we receive any wishes from you, we will be happy to work and provide an updated version of the webinar. You will also receive the slide deck and the recording. And here are our contact details. Please reach out anytime. In terms of the next steps, I would encourage you to reach out to ThinkIt. Think together about the challenges you experience with data sharing, and think together about how would you solve them, and just build. And while building, upskill your teams to be able to maintain your data spaces in the long term. Thank you all for your attention, and we are happy to hear from you. Thank you, Rami, Kai, Federico, and have a great day.
Thank you.